How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the EEEnthusiast YouTube channel. Now, I know I've not updated or posted to this channel in over 5 years, so I did want to give you an update as I will be rebranding a little bit when it comes to this channel and posting a little bit more content that is going to be aligned with what I've been doing in my career. That being said, I wanted to give you an update, but I also wanted to discuss some of the challenges that I know many engineers are currently facing due to layoffs, and maybe give you some tips as to how the channel as well as the technical content and technical knowledge has helped me land my first, my second, my third, or any other opportunities that you might be looking for in engineering. So I'll be giving you a timeline as well as maybe some interesting conversations during interviews that I've had that ultimately helped me land certain jobs, but also share some of the knowledge that might fill in your gaps if that's what you're looking for. If you have any questions for me, I know that I've built a lot of my career and I owe a lot of the opportunities not only to the people but also to the knowledge and the content that I had shared over the years. So if you have any questions for me on that side or on the technical side, don't hesitate to reach out either through this channel in the comments down below or via my LinkedIn. Now, some of you may know that during my late engineering years, this was back in 2012, 2013, 2014, that's when I started originally this channel. And the reason why I started EEEnthusiast is because I was doing a lot of embedded systems project as my third and fourth year in electrical engineering before graduation. So I had to learn how to program Arduinos, I had to learn how to program Atmegas using C, I had to learn C++ as part of the curriculum, and I had to ultimately design and build a lot of PCBs, circuits, and program the functionality for my final capstone project that took place back in 2013, right before I graduated with my bachelor's in electrical engineering. So as I went online, I learned that there was not that much information, at least at that time, when it comes to embedded systems. So I started to film different videos. It was on Altium Designer. I remember I had some videos on early Arduino projects, on how to program C on the Atmega 328, which is the original Arduino Uno microcontroller. I know they have now different lines, but that's a whole other subject. And so by sharing that knowledge, I know that I've not only got a certain audience on YouTube, I also received quite a few connections from the industry, because ultimately new knowledge is extremely important, and if you can learn the platforms that are being used in workplaces today, it's going to help you during interviews, but it's also going to show your passion and your interest in the topic. I can tell you that I was spending a lot of hours outside of my, I want to say, traditional education to learn and understand how to program these systems. I would read data sheets. I have a very popular video on accelerometers that is still receiving a ton of views to this day, and this is 15 years looking back. That being said, in my interviews after graduation, it took quite a few months to land the first job. And I know that many early career engineers are very frightened by the fact that it takes a long time before you find something that is interesting or something that aligns with your passion, so they simply give up and they look somewhere else. Now, I can tell you the current atmosphere of jobs is that you often almost need experience in order to land that first opportunity, so you need to create that experience outside of school for yourself. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? The truth is, all of the graduates coming out of the same year as you, again, there's going to be some discrepancies depending on the university, but for the most part, the curriculums are going to be the same. So how do you differentiate yourself? Well, number one, you should be doing projects outside of the curriculum that are going to be offered by different associations from your university. So in my third and fourth year, I was part of IEEE, which is the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers. And I know that I would spend a lot of time just not only talking to people, but also building different projects. I remember programming the LED cube, which is the introduction project into the embedded systems. I remember building some FPGA type of stuff, and there would be just generally a lot of knowledge inside of those labs, and you could build something that is not going to be told to you by a lab instructor or your even professor, but you can start being creative as an engineer. You can start solving challenges that were not assigned and very defined to you by the academic system. Now, number two is going to companies and asking them what kind of projects they're working on. And I can tell you from personal experience that there's a lot of engineering companies that, although they might not hire someone full-time or even part-time while you're studying, they would have people that can mentor you for, again, a couple of hours a week in order to maybe get you up to speed on the systems they're using, but they also are able to vet your knowledge as well as your interest in that domain so that they can bring you on board maybe in a year, maybe in two, depending on when you graduate. So for me, my biggest interview, I first started a job as a field engineer for Mitsubishi Electric out of Cypress, California, but I had an interview that was with Procter & Gamble. That was an extremely interesting opportunity. And the way Procter & Gamble does interviews for those types of engineering roles is they will interview a certain number of engineers and they will have them in the pool until a specific job opens up on the market at a different facility within North America. So I was ultimately interviewed at a facility out of Maine.
Welcome to Maine!
And to be honest with you, I fell in love with walking the floor and seeing the machines operate. I had never seen anything like it. I was not exposed to going and seeing a manufacturing process as part of the university curriculum. So everything was brand new to me. I was able to see motors, PLCs, HMIs, look inside of cabinets. And so I immediately took that offer and accepted the position and moved across the country from Los Angeles to Maine and settled there for essentially 3 years. Now, at Procter & Gamble is where I learned a lot of the technical knowledge as well as leadership knowledge that I have today. So number one, I did not know what a PLC, HMI, SCADA, or MES systems were up until then. So this is back in early 2014. I started to learn each one of those platforms, but also see how they're utilized in the context of manufacturing, how different managers would approach and make decisions based on which platforms would need to be installed. And very quickly, I was given the opportunity to bring in multiple production lines to that facility. I had some other projects. I had some speed up projects. I had some quality projects, some machine vision projects. So there was a lot going on at that specific facility. And the reason being is that it was one of the highest facilities when it comes to an automation standpoint among all the global facilities for Procter & Gamble. And not to get into too many details, they use this IWS system, which was also purchased by Kraft Heinz. It was also purchased by Ernst & Young, and they're doing a lot of consulting when it comes to optimizing manufacturing from IWS, or Integrated Work Systems, which is a system that is derived from Lean Six Sigma, if you're familiar with those manufacturing best practices. But I can tell you, bar none, that was one of the most interesting experiences that I've had, and one of the reasons why I landed the job at Procter & Gamble. It's not only the people that gave me the opportunity as a fresh graduate without any experience in automation, but I did lean in a lot into what I had built on this channel, which was technical content, explaining embedded systems, explaining how to build circuits. And even though a lot of that was not necessarily relevant to industrial automation, it allowed me to show the fact that I actually was enjoying building systems, understanding complex challenges, and I was able to solve something on my own that I was not necessarily, as I mentioned, given to by a professor like many other graduates were. Now, I've said this in other conversations, and I believe that if I would have stuck through the challenges at Procter & Gamble, and I'm not going to get into all of them, which some of them were self-inflicted. My wife and I actually lived an hour and a half away from the site, so every morning I would drive an hour and a half to the site, and then I would drive back an hour and a half. That became a huge challenge over the years, and so at some point, once my wife graduated with her master's, we decided it was time to make a change. So we moved back to California, and that's where I took a maintenance manager position with Kraft Heinz. Now, at Procter & Gamble, we were manufacturing what's called medical devices, right? So this was an FDA level 2 regulated medical device. Once I moved to Kraft Heinz, as you can imagine, that is going to be food and beverage. And the facility I was at was ultimately making Lunchables. So if you're not familiar, it's these small packs that would contain different food items for typically kids. And it would be ham, cheese, crackers, or chips. So I began in a engineering role at Procter & Gamble, and now I was in a maintenance position. So maintenance is very different from engineering, and again, I can go into a lot of detail as to how they differ, But ultimately, my perspective is that engineering has a much longer foresight. So some of my projects that I was working on at P&G were going to be 1 year, 2 year, 3 long timelines, whereas maintenance was going to be, or was, a lot more reactive, right? So you needed to schedule people, you needed to understand the current issues on the plant floor, you needed to work with operations, you needed to show up to DDS or daily direction settings meetings, you need to understand how the lines are currently running, what can we do with them, who's working on which order, you needed to manage SAP, and ultimately I needed to assign different workflows for mechanics, for electricians that were reporting to me in order to address different issues. As you can imagine, the schedule for maintenance is also very different, because maintenance, you're essentially always on call. You need to be able to resolve issues that the plant floor or the operators cannot resolve, which then gets escalated to your mechanic or electrician depending on the nature of the problem. And then if that's not going to be resolved, then it goes to the engineer. And since I had most of the experience at the time, I would typically get called. I would drive in and solve problems, whether that's on safety circuits, on programming, on hardware and or software. Now, Kraft Heinz is a very interesting company in many ways. Again, I can get into a lot of details on that side, but what happened was back in 2015, the company was ultimately purchased by Berkshire Hathaway and 3G Capital, two very wealthy, very established companies. What they did was originally they merged Kraft and Heinz. They also purchased, and again, this is maybe like a separate topic, they had purchased Burger King, Popeye's Chicken, as well as Tim Hortons in Canada. They've also made a lot of the similar changes, but ultimately what we saw at Kraft Heinz in 2017 when I was there was that they started to reduce budgets quite a bit. And I remember this very well. I remember a meeting where a vice president of operations came to our facility and was asking a lot of questions as to the state of affairs on the plant floor, on the financials, on the hardware, on the assets ultimately running production. And to be quite honest with you, I couldn't tell that they were extremely happy with the facility, which ultimately, again, this is public information, led to the closure of that facility in 2018. Now, while I was working at Kraft Heinz, I had developed a really good relationship with one of the contractors, and this is another very important point for young engineers. You never truly know who's going to have an opportunity for you. This could be a contractor, this could be a systems integrator, this could be a distributor, this could be a vendor or OEM. So always be not only kind to people, but behave in a way that is professional and shows your skills, aptitudes, and ultimately interest in the field. Do not overly complain, even though it is often the easy path in some of those initiatives. So anyways, I had built a relationship with one of the contractors that was on site, and he had a couple of projects for not only Kraft Heinz as a contractor, but also for a company or a holding company called Post Holdings. And so again, this is a very large food and beverage conglomerate. So I started to do some work for him. I started to travel to different sites. I started to do a lot of data work. So right now, again, if you don't come from the manufacturing space, and this is going to be some of the topics I do want to cover on this channel, there is a huge opportunity on data. And that comes with its own complexity, and we'll discuss that and break that down on the channel. But what I want you to realize is that I started to travel to different sites. I started to work on projects on extracting data into the SCADA, MES, and ERP layers. And I started helping manufacturers understand what can be tweaked or what can be invested in order to make production better. Now, this ultimately means from a asset standpoint, but this also means from a personnel standpoint and or operation standpoint, right? So if you gather the data needed to realize that you have a bottleneck on the fourth shift during the night because of XYZ reason, and you bring in a proposal to address that issue, whether that's capturing data on your systems or what's been changed on the parameters, then you can give the ROI to the facility based on that project. Similarly, if you find a bottleneck in your production line, whether that's on the filler, on the capper, on the palletizer, case packer, through, again, data that is measurable, presentable, and is shown in a report without a doubt, then you can get money to solve that issue in order to gain the ROI from eliminating that bottleneck. And again, that's something I want to get into, but ultimately I started doing a lot of those projects. I started to do a lot of automation projects when it comes to PLCs, HMIs, SCADAs, MES. So I started to program different systems in the manufacturing world. Now, if we fast forward back to, or I guess back to 2019, I started to travel a whole lot. I was traveling 90 to 95% of the time. And as you can imagine, traveling and doing engineering work becomes quite difficult for your other aspects of life, your relationships, maybe the family you're trying to build. And so I had many conversations with my employer at the time. And obviously, I understand that the nature of manufacturing work is that you do need to show up. You do need to be able to see the problem and experience the issue and talk to the people in order to solve it. But ultimately, it becomes very difficult if you're always on the road, you're always living out of a hotel. And I can tell you, again, from personal experience, the manufacturing world is not always going to be in the nicest areas, let's put it that way, of the world. So sometimes you need to go into very small towns to work at these facilities. So long story short, I decided to change my career a little bit to gain a little bit more management experience, and I went back to school to do my MBA at McGill University. So this was 2019 to 2021. I went back full time. During that time, I was still working for the same employer. I was still traveling on certain weekends and certain holidays in order to address the issues in manufacturing because I enjoyed manufacturing quite a bit. While all of that was happening, I started to do two things. So I was still maintaining a presence on EEEnthusiast, but I saw an opportunity in the industrial space, specifically when it comes to industrial automation. So I started to create content and videos on a channel called Soless PLC. I thought that the content wasn't going to resonate with the people on EEEnthusiast, which again may have been a mistake in hindsight, but I wanted to create a different kind of content for a different audience. So I created a separate channel for those videos, and you can go and watch them. All of them are still up. Out of that opportunity, a whole company was born. I have a set of videos, I have a set of lectures. I still teach engineers and technicians on how to solve and program a lot of those systems. So if you're interested in that aspect, more than happy to chat about that. Feel free to reach out. But anyways, that's going to be solessplc.com. Now, this brings us back to the graduation date of 2021, April, May-ish. So now I have a degree in electrical engineering and I have my MBA. What decision do you think I would be making at that point in time? And look, I'm not going to comment a lot on the MBA experience. That I think is a whole other maybe discussion. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. But my vision ultimately for myself was to go into consulting because I wanted to learn the ropes of being a polished consultant, less so a purely technical professional, right? I didn't want to be the one who's being sent to on site to go and program the PLCs, HMIs, and SCADAs. I want to be the one who creates the higher level solutions. Now, I had the opportunity also to continue working on Soless PLC, but also look into other startups. So at that point in time, I had a long conversation with a couple of colleagues of mine, and we decided to go the startup route, which ultimately where the idea after a couple of months was born for a company called Kernel. And so Kernel is a DevOps tool which allows you to observe the software systems or the distributed software systems, which I thought was an incredibly interesting idea based on my manufacturing background, because in software you have a similar problem when it comes to understanding the assets or different applications within a larger ecosystem. And to me, that was the same problem that you had in manufacturing. So in manufacturing, you have a production line and you have, again, a filler, a case packer, a labeler, a palletizer. So you have more of a linear system from which you extract data in order to understand the bottleneck. Where in software, you have a similar type of effect, but I would say that the system is less linear and more of a mesh. And so you're trying to understand where within that mesh you have certain problems when it comes to your software in order to address different end usability problems. Now, Kernel left aside, so we've raised a lot of capital on that side, and the CEO had tremendous had a tremendous VC network, so I give him a lot of props for being able to raise that kind of money. We worked on that project, or at least I was on that project up until fall 2024. I decided to go back to manufacturing, and I'll throw in another tangent in just a moment, because I was still very much interested in the problems happening in that space. I think that for me, it's always been important to be able to see the actual problem. I think pure software is something that you need to have a lot of passion for on that side. And ultimately, I love software, but I like to see finished goods a lot more. I think I've been indoctrinated, so to speak, into industrial automation, into manufacturing very early in my career. And so I just love being able to show up to a facility, being able to see products being made. And so I made the decision to go back into manufacturing as of a couple of months ago. And so at this point, I am working on a couple of consulting projects in manufacturing. I will be, like I said, creating some content because I think sharing the knowledge is extremely important. Now, again, taking a step back, so this has been 4 years ago, so 2020, I had also started to work on a podcast called The Manufacturing Hub together with a colleague by the name of Dave Griffith. Dave and I have met purely on LinkedIn. Again, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to meet people and connect with people that may not be in your circles at this moment. But social platforms such as LinkedIn, where mostly professionals hang out, and again, there's a whole debate whether or not it's turning into Facebook or TikTok or anything else, but I still think there's a lot of very smart individuals on the platform that you can reach out to, that you can connect with, that you can, again, maybe reach out for an opportunity for, but ultimately to share your knowledge and passion, whether that's in software, in hardware, in industrial automation, manufacturing, or embedded systems, whatever that may be. So long story short, for 4 years, we've been doing a podcast on manufacturing, which also pulled me back into the industry because I've been talking to many very highly positioned experts in the field, and we've had people from CEO of Siemens all the way to engineer of their own company, sort of lone warriors, so to speak. And so it showed me that there's an opportunity, there's a need for people in manufacturing. So again, to maybe summarize the entire story or summarize where I'm at today is I'm working as a sole contributor, as a consultant in the manufacturing space. I'm exploring other areas. I think that there's a lot of interesting groups working on tools in manufacturing. And again, I can share some names, of course. Some of the groups that I'm looking at, it's Google has an interesting manufacturing practice, AWS, Azure, Microsoft. I think that smaller companies that have raised funds in manufacturing have also very interesting solutions. So I'm not close to going back into the industry as an employee, but at this point in time, I think that the best, at least, or the short-term best position for me would be to consult on my own due to my, again, technical expertise from engineering, as well as the knowledge that I've gained during the MEA and that I was able to practice, again, at different companies in different positions as a manager. So long story short, if you guys have any questions about growing your career, getting started in engineering, just reaching out and maybe asking me some questions on any and all of those topics, you can find me on this channel. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Like I said, I will be posting a lot more topics on manufacturing and industrial automation on this channel, so stay forward to that. And if that interests you, make sure to stay around. And if that doesn't interest you, then I wish you all the best. And I think it's been a very interesting journey. I think many years have passed, and I'm happy to be back to where ultimately some of the greatest things in my career have begun.